So hello guys. So to give you a brief intro, basically this video is about the AWS AI certification exam that was recently launched, and this is the second part of a video that I made earlier, in which I discussed about the pattern of the exam and certain questions that I remember from the exam. So I discussed in the first part around 25 to 30 questions that I encountered in the exam that I remembered. However, there were quite a bit of reach outs to me asking me to see if any more questions I remember. So I tried to go through the exam guide and I tried to recollect some of the questions that I would be discussing. So these are around 9 to 10 questions that I remember now from the exam. So I will be discussing that. So to start with, one question that I encountered was around, let's say, a use case was given in which it was written that the dataset that is used to train a model has some confidential information present. And let's say when I do a prompt engineering and I ask a query to the model, so the confidential data should not be taken into consideration while answering a question. So basically, if I ask a question from the model, it should not take into consideration the confidential data and answer the question accordingly. So what you can do? So there were options like you can KMS, like you can encrypt the data using KMS encryption. You can remove the confidential data from the dataset, or you can data mask the data, or there was some other encryption mentioned that I do not remember. So here, if we go through the options one by one, basically if we go through KMS encryption, so basically KMS encryption is like we are encrypting the data using KMS keys, and confidential data is something like we are removing the confidential data from the dataset that is used to train the model. So that is also a possible answer that could be possible. Data masking is something like where we mask the data. Like let's say if I say my name is Rahul, so I'm masking the data as Rahul will come as Lakshay. Like it will change the data to some other format, some other form. So ideally, so to give a disclaimer, as I am not aware what the actual answers of these questions would be. So, but what I did was I choose the KMS encryption option because I felt that if we encrypt the data KMS, like using KMS, so the model, like while generating an answer, should not would not be able to give answers related to confidential data because the data is already encrypted. But now when I read the question again, so removing confidential data is also a potential correct answer, because if we remove the data from the data set, so it's obvious that when the model answer, it will not have any confidential data to look upon. So that could also be a potential option. So you can go through them and maybe use your own judgment. Okay. So one more question that I remember from the exam is, so basically in that, I do not remember the question exactly, but I tried to remember it. So basically what was given was like there are 3 different teams, and they are using Bedrock, and all of them have a common Bedrock role, and they want to access different folders in S3 bucket. Let's say I have a team A, team B, team C, and I have a S3 bucket. That's the example. So in example bucket, I have 3 different folders. Let's say A, B, C. So team A should only access the folder A, team B should access the folder B, and team C should access the folder C in a common S3 bucket. So out of 4 options, 2 you would be able to eliminate directly. The other 2 options left were that you should create different IAM roles for all 3 folders. Basically, IAM role 1 for the first team, IAM role 2 for the second team, or the other option was that one role should access S3 bucket on base, like in the S3 bucket policy, they can restrict based on the folder name. Like only team A can access this folder, team B can access this folder. So that would be a potential better option because the operational overhead is less, because here we are only creating one IAM role instead of 3. So let's go to the third question. This is a bit confusing. I do not remember it exactly, but there were certain things around how can you moderate the content in AI. So basically, and a thing was that least operational overhead should be taken into consideration. So some options were like content moderation guidelines, invocation of content moderation API calls. So basically, what is invocation of content moderation API calls is like there are certain API calls like start content moderation, which basically filters out the offensive content. Or one option was content moderation logging. However, this option I feel has a bit of extra operational overhead because we have to moderate all the content, so that should not be answer. Out of these two, content moderation guidelines and content moderation API calls, one should be the answer, but as I mentioned, I am not sure about like what the answer would be. You can read about it and use your own judgment for the best answer that you think, because the issue is like even if you pass the exam, you won't get which questions you did correct or which question you did wrong. One more question that I remember was basically there is a model that is trained on some data, and you need to show transparency to the shareholders of the organization. So what you will do? One option was that you can show sample data to them. Sample data is basically the data that is used to train the test data set. Second was you can show some graphical plots representing the outcome of the data, how the model is performing. And third is you can show the code that is used to generate the application or the model. So sample data is of no use because it's a training data, so it would not show any transparency. Transparency is something that proves that okay, why a certain model has given a particular answer. So sample data should not be, and similarly code should not be shown because it can be a security concern. Also, it will not prove any transparency. Graphical plots can show a bit of transparency because they can tell you how the answer was generated for a certain prompt or question. So the best option here would be graphical plots. And one question I remember was of private link. So what the question was is like I have some content in my S3 bucket, and I want that when users are accessing my S3 bucket, they should not go through like basically it's a AI model and we have S3 bucket in the background, so users should not go through public internet. There should be a private connection made. So what can we do in this case? So in this case, private link is the option to access the S3 bucket privately. Also read about VPC endpoint and VPC gateway, because in S3 it's private link, but for other services the answer differs. Now one simple question was that what is the main purpose of Gen AI? So whenever you see this question, the main purpose of Gen AI, so as you would already be aware of that Gen AI main purpose is to create new content, generate new creative ideas. So whenever you see this, look for the options that say generating something. Now next question was that there was some use case given, and it mentioned that there is a ask that the model should create creative outputs or results. So what you will do? Will you increase the top P? Will you increase the top K? Will you increase the temperature? So basically top P is something like when the model considers, let's say I put top P as 10, so model considers the top 10% of most probable items to make a decision. So that is nowhere related to generating creative content. So whether we lower the P or higher the P, there would not be effect. Only the answer would get differed based on the most probable percentage of items that the model takes into consideration when making a decision. Similarly, top K, it will not affect the model from generating creative content. So if you have read about temperature is basically used for creating creative content, and the value of temperature is from 0 to 1. So as we move from 0 to 1, let's say I have put the value of temperature as 1, so then the model will generate creative content. It will not generate the expected outputs. Like if I'm expecting that if I ask a question where is Pluto, so I'm expecting some certain answer, but the model will generate some creative answers. So that is the main purpose behind temperature. Although this is not a good example where is Pluto, but you can think of let's say I have some data and I want to generate unique images out of that data. So in that case, temperature can be of it's good parameter to judge on. Now moving to next question. One question was that a company wants to use Bedrock for product recommendations, and the company wants to provide its own label data to improve the foundational model's accuracy or performance. Now remember one thing, that when we use Amazon Bedrock, and you would already be aware of that Amazon Bedrock has predefined models trained on certain amount of data, and when you use that data to fine tune the model, you always make a copy of that base foundation model. You never do fine tuning on the Bedrock's model. So just remember two things. One, that you always make a copy of the foundational base model. Second, it always makes a private copy of the model. It never makes a public copy, because public copy is, there are certain risks associated. One is security, and why would you create a public copy? You do not want to show it to the world. So remember two things. So similarly, if you know this, you will be able to answer this question easily. That is, leverage Bedrock to make a separate copy, and then train the private copy of the model using the data that you have. Basically fine tune the model. Next is, it's a simple question. It's based on shared responsibility model. You should only remember two things here. There are two types of responsibilities. One is customer side, one is the Amazon side. So customer side is something which is like, let's say if I have an EC2 instance and I have hosted some application on the EC2 instance, so the security of the applications is the customer's responsibility, but the availability of the EC2 instance is the Amazon's responsibility. So basically the infrastructure and maintaining that hardware is the AWS responsibility, but security of your applications, credentials, all they lie in the customer side of responsibility. So just remember this part. You will be able to easily choose the option. This was also a simpler question, but yeah, it is not covered well in the sources from where I read, so I am discussing it. It was like a business analyst use NLP, that is basically natural language, to build business intelligence dashboards. So it was something related to Q, so Amazon Q. So there are certain options given: Q developer, Q business, Q connect, Q in QuickSight. So now if we eliminate options one by one, basically if you have heard about Connect is basically for creating a contact center. Basically when we want to create cases and where we want to create a contact between client and the AWS service support. So there is no way linked to the business intelligence here, so we can eliminate Q in Connect. Q developer is something related to AWS products, like your AWS infrastructure, and Q business is something when you have your own, let's say, organization, and you want to create a chatbot that can answer questions related to your own inbuilt organization architecture, like your organization's like HR policies or something. So, and QuickSight is something which is used to build business intelligence dashboards. So basically BI tools, like QuickSight is a BI tool. So you remember it, like if you see the word business intelligence, it's always QuickSight, because QuickSight is a business intelligence tool. So that was all for this. I have almost discussed around 40 questions that I remember. Rest, according to my experience, rest questions were a bit simpler. So if you have read about the sources, like when you were preparing it, so I think you would be able to answer. This was just because the exam is a bit different than the actual courses available on Udemy or any other online courses. So that's why I thought it was important to discuss. Yes, and if you want, I can create a practice test series maybe, where we can discuss one question one by one, and basically these were the exam questions that I remember. That would be practice questions, so it's for your practice, for your learning. Yeah, I will see if I get time to make those. That's all for it. So thanks. Cheers.